Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my spiritual journey. My name is Dave Thomas Rocker. Haven't made any videos in a while, but today I'm going to make a video on a topic I think is very important. Anyway, before I do that, let me just make a little plug for my book called My Spiritual Journey. I wrote this summer, and it's available on Amazon. $30 paperback, $15 Kindle. If you haven't purchased already, I recommend it. I think it's a good book, and I talk about a lot of the issues that I talk about in my videos. So please buy it if you haven't already done so. Anyway, that's my plug. Today I want to talk about War and Peace. And this is a picture of the cover. It was a famous novel by Leo Tolstoy, written in the 19th century, and it was really about the Napoleonic War between France and Russia in the early 19th century, waged by Napoleon. A very terrible war, a lot of horrible death and atrocity in Russia. Unfortunately, I guess Leo Tolstoy was mainly concerned with all that, and I think he had good reasons to be. Anyway, it was also a movie, very good movie from 1956, starring Audrey Hepburn and Henry Fonda and Mel Ferrer. I recommend watching the movie. It's a very good movie. Both the movie and the book are very, very long, by the way. I've never read the book. I did watch the movie a couple of times. The movie's excellent, even though it's almost 4 hours long. It's an excellent movie, so I do recommend it. But I don't really want to specifically talk about the Tolstoy's novel. I just want to talk about the general concepts of War and Peace. So here, this is probably very familiar scene to most of you guys. This is what modern warfare looks like, basically. Got a lot of arms, soldiers, camouflage, Marines, it looks like, ready to shoot some people behind the rocks. I don't know where these guys are. It doesn't really matter that much. I don't like war, but and here's another scene. I don't even know which war this is, but to contrast with war, we of course we have peace, and I'm a big proponent of peace, world peace. I'd like to see it someday. I don't know if we'll ever have it, but I think depending on how we define war and peace, I think that we can have it even pretty soon. In my opinion, if define war as physically violent human conflict, I think it is possible for humanity to end physical violence. We really don't need it. I mean, if anything, I think Martin Luther King and Gandhi prove that we don't need it because we can affect very powerful social change just with, civil disobedience, as they both showed. Anyway, enough of that. But there's a really excellent book that I read a few years ago. It's by a very famous psychologist named Steven Pinker, and the book is called "The Better Angels of Our Nature," and it's a really excellent book. It's kind of about the history of violence, the history of warfare, not just warfare, but violence in general in human society. And the premise of this book, which is kind of surprising to a lot of people, I guess Pinker is a very strong optimist. He says that right now, or at least when he wrote this book, which was around 2010, he said that we were living in the most peaceful time in human history. That, basically things have been getting better and better for humanity, not just technologically, which is pretty obvious, but also socially and in terms of reducing violence and basically improving our quality of life. And he backs it up with a lot of statistics, and I was really pretty amazed by this. I mean, if you look at history, like if you look at primitive society when we were cavemen, there's probably about a 50% chance that you were going to be killed by someone or something. If it wasn't a animal you were trying to hunt, there was a good chance you'd be killed off by neighboring tribe members, maybe even members of your own tribe. And there was a lot of horrible disease too. And life expectancy was only about 25 years. Even when we started having, the first civilizations, they were very violent too and very horrible in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at, like ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all those societies, they all had rulers with absolute power, and most people were slaves, and there was warfare going on all the time. It was just a way of life, and I think your chances of being killed by another person were still pretty close to 50%. So things gradually got better over the centuries. So you go into medieval Europe, and that was a pretty horrible time too. Obviously, I think not as many people were being murdered, but there was this horrible torture going on during the Middle Ages, instituted by the church. They just did terrible tortures to heretics, and church had absolute authority, and it was just horrible disease. And finally, the Renaissance things started getting a little bit better. One thing that really made them better in the Renaissance was the invention of the printing press. And I thought this was really interesting too, because once people started reading, once we had the printing press and people started reading novels, I guess this kind of took off maybe around the turn of the 19th century, once we had like this production of newspapers. There was newspapers printed with stories by authors like Charles Dickens, and people could read firsthand for the first time about how horrible other people have suffered. And I think once people started being able to put themselves in other people's shoes by reading these stories about horrible suffering that was going on, I think it made people more compassionate. And, I mean, things just got better and better. And, of course, we're still fighting wars today, but. The latest, I think, a really good development in society. This only started in the mid 20th century. This was basically human rights. I mean, think about it. I mean, we had slavery most of history. There's still parts of the world that still have slavery, but for the most part, slavery, at least in the developed world, is a thing of the past, and I think it's a really good thing it is. I can't imagine what slavery was like, and even the United States, as you all know, had slavery until 1865, when Lincoln freed the slaves. And of course, things were terrible for the African Americans for the next hundred. I mean, they still are in a lot of ways, but we had segregation. We sort of had three phases of racism against African Americans in our history. The first was slavery. Second was segregation. That went on from around 1865 to about the mid 60s. Once we had the civil rights movement, that ended that. But that was really terrible too. I mean, black people and white people weren't allowed to do anything together, and black people were terribly discriminated against. The only good kind of jobs they could get were jobs as servants, or farmers, I guess. And they just weren't. I mean, one sad thing I think about the African Americans is still true today. African Americans in this country have never been able to live the American dream. I mean, white people did for a while. I don't think we are even right now, but like if you look at the 50s, I'd say the 50s through the 70s, maybe in the 80s, I'd say most white people in America were living the American dream. We had a very strong middle class, but I wouldn't say African Americans were part of that. But, I mean, at least we had civil rights. I mean, the rights weren't even an issue. Even Reagan said that. I remember when Reagan was, in the presidential debates against Jimmy Carter in 1980, one of the reporters asked Reagan if he thought, what we should do about, the racial problem with the African Americans. And of course, he was a terrible racist. And I remember his answer. He said that when he was young, we didn't even think we had a racial problem. And I don't think he even thought we did as president. But, enough of that. I mean, we've had rights, ever since the 50s. We started with civil rights, and then, by the 70s, we started having, women's rights, women's liberation, and then gay rights, and finally even animal rights. So I think people are much more aware of, how to treat other conscious creatures, not just humans. And I think that's great. And all these things. I mean, now if you look at like the homicide rate, in the United States and other developed countries, I think the United States has one of the highest among developed countries, by the way. But even the United States, the homicide rate is only about, when he wrote the book, anyways, I think it was around five homicides per 100,000 people per year. That seems like a lot, but it's really not. That means you only have about a half a percent chance of being murdered. in the United States, and it's less probably in Europe, but it's probably more in a lot of underdeveloped countries. But it's very very low. I mean, considering that it used to be about 50%, I'd say we've made tremendous progress just in terms of not killing each other as much as we used to. Of course, we still have war going on. That's a whole nother issue. But anyway, enough of that. And the title "The Better Angels of Our Nature" that actually comes from a very famous quote by Abraham Lincoln. And I didn't even know about this quote until just a few minutes ago. I was surfing on the web, and I think this is a wonderful quote that Lincoln came up with. And of course, he was president during the Civil War, but he was against war. I mean, he felt the Civil War was a necessary war, and I agree with that. And then I'm not saying that I am a pacifist, but I don't think that that means that every war that's ever been fought is bad. I mean, I'd say probably about 1 or 2% of wars are necessary. I mean, here's how I feel about war. We fight wars for a lot of different reasons. Most of them are very bad. I think a big reason we fought most wars throughout history was just greed. We wanted more. We wanted more territory, or we wanted more resources, and we wanted power over our enemies. We wanted all this shit. And I think the only good reason for going to war is self-preservation. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't just, we have to defend ourselves. We can't just be sitting ducks. We have to fight for our survival. That's pretty obvious. But other than that, I'd say there's no legitimate reason for ever going to war. Ideologies. There's a lot of other reasons. I mean, ideologies. A lot of it based on religion or superstition or whatever people like to believe. Including Israel and Hamas. I mean, they're religious fanatics, most of them. That's why they're fighting each other. Even though I'm Jewish, and I'm glad that the Jews have a homeland. I don't like how either side is behaving in terms of fighting each other, and it's unfortunate we have that. But anyway, here's another really great quote about war. This is by President Roosevelt, FDR. He was president, I'm sure as you all know, during the Great Depression and World War II, and I think he was one of our greatest presidents, probably the greatest president of the 20th century. And he had an amazing quote about war, and this was, I think, from 1936. He's talking about World War I. He witnessed that firsthand, and he just witnessed all the horrible atrocities. And this is why he didn't want to get involved, with all the horrible stuff that was going on in Europe at that time. Eventually, he did. I mean, he did want to. I mean, he's still good. I mean, he did end up. We did end up fighting World War II. We basically saved the world against the Nazis who were trying to take over the world, and it's a good thing we did. And I think it was mostly his Congress that a lot of the members of Congress didn't want to go to war. We had to wait till we were bombed in Pearl Harbor. That was kind of our wake up call. But we did save the world for what it's worth. We did end the Holocaust, and we also defeated the Japanese. I never figured out why they got involved, by the way. But that was a good war. I mean, if you want to talk about good wars and bad wars, World War II was a very good war for us to fight. We needed to. Otherwise, I'd hate to see where we are today. But I mean, war in general is pretty bad. And I like this figure here. This is kind of if you look at the top, this is kind of like a two opposing diagrams of human evolution. On top is kind of, I guess, evolution of knowledge. Maybe you can call that spiritual evolution. The last thing shown here is E equals MC squared, which is, of course, one of the most famous equations ever discovered by Einstein. And I mean, I think it's amazing what we've accomplished. In terms of our knowledge, in terms of our just how we understand the universe. And unfortunately, if you look at the bottom diagram, this is kind of an evolution of warfare, of weapons. And even though we're not killing as many people as we used to, we have better and better weapons for killing people. And I mean, of course, we have nuclear weapons, and we had the whole Cold War for, from 1945 to 1991. Well, I mean, nuclear weapons are still a horrible danger, even though it's not just a showdown between the United States and the Soviet Union anymore. Terrorists could potentially build nuclear weapons, and I hate to see what they do with them if they do. So, I mean, we're in danger of destroying ourselves with the weapons we've created. And that's a very scary thing, I think. Although some people might say that it's a good thing because, mad advocates of mutually assured destruction. And there have been many of them. I guess one of the biggest was John von Neumann. He was a very famous mathematician who invented game theory along with John Nash. And he was an advocate of MAD, mutually assured destruction. He said that, if both the United States and the Soviet Union had this big arms race, neither side would dare to use the weapons. And I guess that's kind of what happened. We never did have a war with the Soviet Union. It's a really good thing. Of course, we had a lot of other wars going on the side. The biggest of which I think was Vietnam. That was a really terrible war. There was a lot of terrible warfare in the between, I guess, the communist countries and the capitalist countries. You know, but at least we didn't have a nuclear war, and I guess that's a good thing. But it's interesting because not only these big powerful weapons that can kill thousands of people, even millions of people. We've had more and more powerful handheld weapons. This is kind of the history of just individual arms. Starting 400,000 BC, we had these, I guess, big sticks, which are kind of like spears, and then 1000 BC, I guess that was during the Iron Age. We had some horrible swords. And I guess the first guns were invented in 1368, and of course those became more and more powerful. Now we have these horrible semi-automatic weapons, which I believe are legal in the United States, which I think is really horrible. That's another problem, I think, the Second Amendment. I'm not a fan of the Second Amendment. I don't think that individuals in general should be allowed to own guns. But many of you might disagree. I don't know. But especially here in the United States. I mean, if you look at the handgun murder rate in the United States, it's just. I think I was saying how there's like five homicides per 100,000 people per year in the United States. I think a big fraction of those, maybe over half, is from handguns, and I just think that's inexcusable. But yeah, anyway, so how do I want to kind of conclude this talk tonight? I want to talk about body, mind, and spirit. So there's different forms of progress, like I was talking about earlier. And I think there's three different kinds of evolution, if you want to think of it that way. If the body's kind of the most basic part of who we are, I guess, and if you want to talk about Darwin, I guess Darwin. Darwinian evolution by natural selection is really just evolution of bodies. I mean, survival of the fittest, which I guess means the strongest specimens or the specimens that are most well adapted to their environment. Those are the ones that survive, and that was the first stage of evolution. But then, once humanity became smart enough, we had big enough brains, there was a new form of evolution that started taking over. And this was evolution of technology or knowledge that was brought about by our mind. And that's what's allowed us to create this amazing society we have today. And, that's what's allowed us to live so much better with all this new technology that's always being developed. So I think there's also evolution of the mind, evolution of technology. But like I was talking about earlier, that's also allowed for more and more powerful weapons and making it easier and easier to kill people. But I think there's a third form of evolution. That's spiritual evolution, and that's kind of the evolution of, I guess, of just, um, you know, loving one another, and learning how to get along with each other. Spiritual evolution to me means learning how to be good both to ourselves and to others. And I guess if there was a main guru of spiritual evolution, I think most people in the West would say it was Jesus. I guess a lot of people in the East would say it was Buddha. But there's been a number of very great people throughout history who have made tremendous progress in terms of human spiritual evolution. I think several other people I can think. Unfortunately, most of them were martyrs, but Abraham Lincoln, I mentioned him earlier. And then there was a number of great people I'd say in the 20th century, Gandhi. And then if you look at the 60s, I mean, of course, we had the Kennedys, JFK, Robert Kennedy. Both of them were assassinated, unfortunately, Martin Luther King as well. And, but I think a lot of great people have made great progress for humanity. If you want to talk about a guy who wasn't killed, look at Nelson Mandela. I mean, he was able to end apartheid in South Africa. So I think that's kind of the hope for humanity is our spiritual evolution. And I think eventually we will end war. But, if you define war as physically violent human conflict, maybe eventually we'll even win war completely. I don't think we're anywhere close to doing that, though. What I'd like to see, I mean, if you define war as physically violent human conflict, then you're not just talking about wars between nations. You're also talking about violence. You're talking about murders. You're talking about even fist fights. I mean, that's physical violence, and I don't think we need any of that. I'd like to live in a world with no physical violence. I mean, I was a victim of some terrible physical violence as a child. I got bullied terribly when I was like about 10 years old. I mean, for several years. I guess a lot of kids thought I was an easy target because I was short, I wasn't strong, and I didn't fight back. So a lot of them really picked on me really terribly. A lot of them even beat me up. And I wish that hadn't happened, but it did. And I don't think I'm alone. I mean, I know that, there's probably millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world who face physical violence all the time, probably a lot worse than I did. I was never in a gang. I know that there's like poor kids who it's even dangerous for them to go to school. Like if they live in the inner city, they got to worry about surviving rival gangs, and that's a form of warfare as far as I'm concerned. But I think what could happen, but maybe even in the next 50, 100 years, I think it's possible that we may be able to end physically violent human conflict. I don't know how yet, but I think it's possible. But I think what'll end up replacing it won't mean that people won't be fighting, unfortunately. And I think the next form of warfare is going to be psychological warfare, where people just insult each other, or just make each other's lives miserable without actually physical, um, interaction. And even though that can be really terrible too, and I was a victim of a lot of this as well, even from my own mother, even from my own family. I mean, psychological warfare could be really, really horrible. But I think we need to learn how to do that instead of killing each other. And I think the people who will be the victors of the first psychological wars will be the smarter people, the people who can out argue their enemies. And I think that maybe the casualties of psychological warfare will be mainly suicides, and I don't mind that so much because I think the people who end up killing themselves are the people who should kill themselves. I know that sounds really horrible, but I think maybe in the 22nd century or whenever all this psychological warfare is going on, if all the bullies, if all the just all the kind of dumb punks or the ones who kind of were getting their way before, if they can be argued to believe that they're nothing, then they may end up killing themselves, and that'll probably improve the plight of humanity. I know that sounds really harsh, but I'd rather see that than what's going on today. Yeah, I think eventually we will learn how to get along with each other. I don't know when, maybe 1,000 years from now, but there's going to be war for a long time. It's just gonna, I mean, we've had wars throughout our whole history. I read a long time ago that if you look at the last 5,000 years of human history, there's only been about 200 years of world peace, and it wasn't even really world peace. But when I say world peace, I mean that there were no, major nations at war with each other. I think the most recent time that happened was in the late 19th century, from around 1871 to 1898. I think 1871 was the Franco-Prussian War, and then there weren't any other major wars between nations until the Spanish-American War in 1898. I'm not saying I would want to live at that time because there's a lot of other shit going on in the late 19th century. Mostly a lot of just um, uh, class conflict. I mean, it was the robber baron era, and it was also Victorian England. There was a lot of shit going on at that time, and I mean, I wouldn't want to be living in any period of world history. I'd say more than about 50 or 60 years ago. I probably would have enjoyed the 1960s in the United States. I probably still enjoy that, but I wouldn't have enjoyed to live any time before then because there was just so many problems going on, and we take so much for granted today. I mean, even just technologically. I mean, things are pretty amazing with computers and the web and cell phones. I mean, when I was a kid, you had to go to the bank if you wanted to get money. You had to physically go places where you can now just look things up. You had to go to the library if you want to look anything up. Things were a lot more inconvenient. Of course, at that time, it was all we knew, so it didn't seem like a problem to us. You had to be at home if you wanted to talk on the telephone. Uh, you know, um, but that's just the way it was. And I mean, obviously, we've improved a lot technologically. I think we've also improved socially. Although there's, another thing I want to say about all this is that it's not a it's not a straight line. I mean, I think that's a misconception a lot of people have. But progress is not a straight line. There's a lot of setbacks, and we're always in danger of falling back. And I could think of so many ways at different times in history that we've fallen back, and so that's always a danger. But I think all these fallbacks, if we do the right thing, if we use the better angels of our nature, we won't allow that to continue. And I think for the most part, we've done a pretty good job of that. So anyway, that's pretty much sums up my talk for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. And like I said, please buy my book if you get a chance. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.